He was standing by the side door that led out to the lake, phone pressed to his ear, and I could see his shoulders come up like he was bracing for something to hit him. My brother Jason didn't know I was right behind him. He just flipped through the black binder I'd left open on the kitchen counter. My ledger, 9 years of Venmo receipts printed and stapled, my spreadsheet with every date highlighted, every note in my own handwriting. He said, "Mom, she has everything written down, and then the door clicked shut behind him and the rest was gone." Welcome back to the channel. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 39. I manage the Hillcrest branch of the Boise Public Library, which is a smaller building than people picture when they hear library manager. It's brick, one story, with a children's corner that always smells faintly of crayons and carpet cleaner. I have worked there for 11 years. I live 3 miles away in a 2-bedroom house on a street where everyone has the same silver maple out front. My husband Daniel and I bought it in 2017. He was teaching high school history then. Now he does facilities scheduling for the school district, which is steadier and quieter. Our house is small and honest. Kitchen with a chipped tile by the sink that we never fixed because it doesn't leak. A couch Daniel found on clearance. Bookshelves that I built from library cast-offs. And on the top shelf in our living room, next to the field guides and the framed photo from our wedding, sits a pine woodloom decoy. It's about 14 inches long, hand-carved. My father bought it for me at a craft fair in McCall when I was 9. The paint is worn on its beak where I used to trace it with my finger. For almost 30 years it sat on the mantel at our family lake house. 2 summers ago I brought it home to Boise and put it on my own shelf. I didn't ask permission. No one noticed it was gone. That tells you most of what you need to know about how my family pays attention. The lake house is in McCall, Idaho, about 2 hours north of Boise. It's not grand. It's a cedar A-frame built in 1974 by my grandparents, with a low roof and a big stone fireplace and windows that look straight out over Payette Lake. My mother Evelyn calls it the legacy. She says that word a lot. Legacy. As if saying it enough will keep the roof from leaking. I grew up spending every July there. My brother Jason and I learned to swim off that dock. My father Robert taught us to paddle a canoe without tipping it. My mother kept a strict chore chart taped to the fridge and made us sweep pine needles off the deck every morning before we were allowed to go in the water. In the evenings, we would sit on the floor while my Aunt Carol Whitaker, my mom's younger sister, read to us from library books she'd brought in a tote bag. Carol is 62 now, retired from teaching 2nd grade. She always remembered which of us liked which stories. The house was paid for in my grandparents' time. But by the time I was in my late 20s, it wasn't simple anymore. My grandparents had passed. My parents had refinanced once to put a new roof on. My father was working as an insurance adjuster, and my mother was doing part-time bookkeeping for a dental office. Jason was 27 then, drifting between jobs, living in the lake house year-round because my mother said it needed someone there to keep pipes from freezing. In the summer of 2015, we had a family barbecue at the lake. It was the 4th of July weekend. I was 30. Daniel and I had been married for 2 years. I was working as an assistant librarian, not yet a manager, making just enough to cover our rent in Boise and put a little aside. After dinner, my mother asked me to help her carry the potato salad bowls inside. In the kitchen, with the screen door banging behind us, she said the mortgage supplement was going to be tight that month. She didn't look at me. She was scraping a plate into the trash. She said my father had picked up fewer hours. She said Jason was trying to get on his feet and couldn't contribute. She said the insurance and utilities had gone up again. She asked if I could help just for a little while, just until things even it out. She said it like it was temporary, like it was a favor between family. I said yes. I have always said yes quickly to my mother. It's easier than the pause that comes after you say no. That first payment was $875 for the mortgage supplement. I sent it by check that July. My mother called to thank me and said, "You're keeping this place alive, Lauren." I wrote the date in a small notebook I kept for household expenses. July 18, 2015. $875. I didn't think of it as the 1 month. The next month she called again. Same amount, $875. Then she mentioned the insurance and utilities, another $425, and asked if I could cover that too while I was at it. It would be simpler to send it together, she said. So I did, $875 plus $425, and every month. By the fall, there was a third charge, an annual dock and seawall assessment, $3,100. She said the homeowners association for the lakefront required it, that the seawall was shifting and the dock needed reinforcement before winter. She said it was due in September. I didn't know anything about seawalls. I sent $3,100. I started a spreadsheet that October. I'm a librarian. I keep ledgers for everything. At first, it was just a way to keep track for taxes. To remember what I'd sent. Date, label, amount, confirmation number. I printed every Venmo receipt when we switched to Venmo the next year. Because my mother said checks were a hassle, I stapled them. I wrote notes in the margins. Mom called 912 minus seawall. Jason said thanks for heat bill. No one asked me to keep that ledger. I kept it because I'm quietly dutiful that way. I like to see things add up correctly. For 9 years, I paid. Every month, $875 for the mortgage supplement. Every month, $425 for insurance and utilities. Every September, $3,100 for the dock and seawall assessment. I paid it from Boise while I got promoted to branch manager, while Daniel changed jobs, while we tried to save for a new furnace, while we skipped vacations because we couldn't afford both the lake house and a vacation of our own. I never missed a month, 108 months of the 2 monthly payments, 9 Septembers of the assessment. My spreadsheet ran to 4 pages. My Venmo history was a long scroll of green check marks to Evelyn Hayes. And while I paid, my mother told a different story. I first heard it at Thanksgiving in 2018. We were at my parents' house in Nampa, not the lake house. My cousin from Twin Falls was there with her husband. She asked me when I was coming up to McCall next. I said I hadn't been since August, work was busy. My mother laughed from the kitchen and said, "Lauren doesn't really do the lake anymore. She abandoned the place. She wanted nothing to do with family." I stood there holding a dish of green beans. Daniel was next to me, he squeezed my elbow. I thought she was joking, she wasn't. After that, I heard it again and again. At Christmas. At Easter. From neighbors who called my mother for advice. From my aunt's friend who ran into me at the grocery store in McCall and said, "Your mom said you moved on from the lake house, that's too bad." My mother had built a clean, simple narrative, Evelyn and Robert holding the legacy together on their own, Jason there to help, Lauren too busy in Boise to care. My father never corrected her. My father, Robert, is 66. He is a kind man who has never liked conflict. He lets Evelyn manage the narrative, the way he lets her manage the bills and the holiday cards and the phone calls. When I tried to bring it up once in 2019, I called him after my mother had told my Aunt Carol that I had refused to contribute to a new water heater. I had, in fact, paid the $425 that month plus the $80-75 as always. My father said, "Your mother is under a lot of pressure about the house. Don't make it harder." Jason lived rent-free at the lake house the entire time. He worked sporadically, guiding fishermen in the summer, plowing driveways in the winter. He used the heat I paid for. He used the dock I paid to assess. He parked his truck in the driveway of a house I was keeping afloat and told people I never visited because I didn't care. I kept paying anyway. I told myself it was for my grandparents. I told myself it was for the house itself, the cedar smell, the loon decoy on the mantel. I told myself my mother would eventually say thank you in front of people. She never did. The ledger got thicker. I added a column for running total. I didn't like looking at that column. In February 2024, I had an emergency laparoscopic appendectomy. It was a Tuesday. I had felt sick over the weekend, thought it was flu. By Monday night, I couldn't stand up straight. Daniel drove me to St. Luke's in Boise at 2 in the morning. They took me into surgery at 6. I was in the hospital for 3 days and then home for a week on the couch, with a drain and a list of instructions and a stack of bills that arrived before I could sit up without help. The surgery and hospital stay cost $7,800 after insurance. Daniel was between jobs that month. His district contract had ended in January, and the new one didn't start until March. We had the lake house payments still going out automatically, $875 and $425 on the first of the month. Right? While I was trying to figure out how to pay the anesthesiologist, I didn't tell my family right away. I was embarrassed to need help. On the 4th day home, I called my mother. I was on pain medication. I was trying to be calm. I said I'd had surgery. I was recovering, and I was wondering if we could pause the lake house payments for a month or two, just until Daniel's paychecks started again, and I could cover the $7,800. There was a pause. Then she said, if you were really family, you wouldn't need to be asked. She said it flat, not loud. One sentence. She didn't ask how the surgery went. She didn't ask if I needed anything. She said that sentence and then said she had to go. Jason needed help with the doc, and hung up. I sat on our couch with the phone in my hand. Daniel was in the kitchen heating soup. The loon decoy was on the shelf across from me. I stared at it until my eyes watered. That was the first time I understood that the story she told about me wasn't just careless. It was useful to her. If I had abandoned the lake house, then she didn't have to explain where the money came from. She could be the self-sufficient matriarch who kept the legacy alive through sheer will. My silence paid for that image as surely as my Venmo payments paid for the roof. I did not send the March payment. I didn't send April either. I turned off the automatic transfers. My spreadsheet stopped. For the first time in 9 years, the row for that month was blank. No one called to ask why. My mother didn't call to check on my recovery. My father sent a text that said, "Hope you're feeling better," with a thumbs up emoji. Jason sent nothing. In April, an envelope arrived from my Aunt Carol Whitaker. Inside was a vintage cookie tin, the kind with the faded roses on the lid, the kind Carol always used to bring shortbread in at Christmas. Inside the tin was a bundle of things I had forgotten she kept, photocopies of my handwritten notes from summers I worked at the lake house as a teenager, printed Venmo receipts she had asked me to forward her for safekeeping years earlier, when my mother had once claimed I was late on a payment, and 3 photos of me at 22, staining the deck in an old t-shirt, smiling at the camera Carol held. Underneath was a folded piece of lined paper. Carol's handwriting, small and neat. It said, "I always knew who kept that place afloat." Carol, I sat at our kitchen table and opened the tin and cried for the first time since the surgery. Not because I was sad, but because someone had written it down and kept it. Someone had counted in May. My mother called as if nothing had happened. She said the Hayes Lake House 50th anniversary reunion was planned for July in McCall. 50 years since my grandparents bought the land. She said it would be a community open house, with neighbors and extended family, and she wanted everyone there. She said, "We'd love to have you say a few words about family legacy, Lauren, since you're the oldest." She said it warmly. She said it like an invitation, not an apology. I said I would come. Daniel asked if I was sure. I said I was. I packed the ledger, the printed receipts, the cookie tin, and the loon decoy in a tote bag and put it in our car. We drove to McCall on a Friday in July. The lake was flat and bright. The house looked the same, cedar darkened by weather, dock stretching out, pine trees dropping needles on the roof. Inside, the mantel was bare. I had taken the loon 2 years earlier, and no one had replaced it. My mother had put a vase of plastic flowers there instead. People filled the living room and spilled onto the deck. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors who had watched Jason and me grow up. My mother in a blue dress, greeting everyone at the door like she owned the lake itself. My father by the grill, nodding. Jason in the kitchen, pouring drinks, not meeting my eyes. My mother clapped her hands and said it was time for a few words. She thanked everyone for coming to celebrate 50 years of the Hayes family lake house. She talked about legacy and sacrifice and holding things together when others walk away. She looked right at me when she said that last part and smiled. Then she said, "Lauren, why don't you say a few words about what family means to you?" The room went quiet. Daniel's hand found the small of my back. I picked up my tote bag. I took out the black binder and the cookie tin and set them on the kitchen counter where everyone could see them. I took out the pine wood loon decoy and held it for a second before I set it back on the mantel where it had lived my whole childhood. It fit exactly in the dust outline it had left. Jason was standing near the hallway. He stared at the binder, then at the loon, then he turned and walked fast toward the side door that led out to the lake. He pulled his phone from his pocket as he went. That is when he said it. "Mom, she has everything written down. The door clicked. I stood there with my ledger open, my Aunt Carol's tin beside it, and my mother's eyes on me from across a room full of people who had been told I abandoned them. I hadn't yet said a single number out loud. It started with $875. That was the number my mother said at the barbecue in the summer of 2015. We were at the lake house in McCall. My father was at the grill, and Jason was 27 and living in the back bedroom that used to be mine and Rachel's. And my mother stood by the cooler with a paper plate in her hand and said the bank had adjusted the mortgage supplement, and they were short. She didn't ask me directly. She said it to the air, to everyone, that they might have to sell if they couldn't cover the gap. Jason laughed and said nobody was selling his lake. My father flipped burgers and didn't look up. I was 30. Daniel and I had been married 2 years. I was an assistant librarian then, not yet managing the branch on State Street in Boise. We were renting a 1-bedroom over a garage on the bench. I had a spreadsheet for everything. Groceries, gas, the payment on Daniel's old Subaru. I said I could help with the supplement for a few months until they figured it out. My mother hugged me. She said that was what family did. The few months never ended. I set up an automatic transfer on the first of every month, $875 to my mother's checking account, labeled mortgage supplement. I kept the confirmation emails in a folder. Then in October she called and said the insurance had gone up and the propane bill was late, and could I cover utilities too? It was $425. She said it was just for the winter. I added a second automatic transfer, $425 on the 15th. I told Daniel it was temporary. He nodded and said we would make it work. He was working as a field tech for a telecom contractor then. Good hours, overtime when it was cold. Then the next July there was a letter about the Homeowners Association assessment for the dock and seawall. $3,100 due August 1st. My mother forwarded me a photo of it, blurry, taken on her phone, and said Jason had been trying to fix the dock boards himself, but the county required certified work. I sent $3,100. That became the pattern. Every year, $3,100. Every month, $875. And our information number? I printed Venmo receipts when she asked me to switch to Venmo in 2018 because it was easier for her. I put them in a black binder with sheet protectors. Daniel teased me that I cataloged my own family like a library collection. I said someone should. For 9 years I paid. 108 months of $875. That is $590 and 9 years of $3,100. That is $27,900. I did not add it up until much later. At the time, I just saw the monthly total leaving our account. $1,300 every month, plus the assessment every summer. It was more than our rent for the first 3 years. It was more than my car. We didn't talk about it at holidays. My mother talked about the lake house constantly, but not about money. She told people at church and at the grocery store and at every family gathering how she and my father had kept the place for 50 years through hard work and sacrifice. She told my cousins that Jason was watching over the property, that he was maintaining it. Jason did live there. He lived there rent-free from 2016 on, after he lost his job at the lumber yard. He parked his truck on the lawn. He had friends over who left beer cans on the dock. My mother said he was good for security. When I visited, which was less and less, I would see the things I had paid for. The new metal roof in 2019, the propane tank filled, the insurance certificate on the fridge. I would scrub the kitchen and sweep the pine needles off the deck, and my mother would say, "Oh, you don't have to do that," and then tell my Aunt Carol later that I never lifted a finger. Carol is my mother's younger sister. She is 62, lives in Nampa, retired from teaching middle school math. She is the only one who ever asked me directly, in 2017, if I was still sending money every month. We were at a funeral for my grandfather, standing by the coat rack, and she touched my elbow and said, "Honey, are you still covering the lake?" I said yes. She didn't say anything else then, just squeezed my arm. I thought she disapproved of me for paying. I understand now she disapproved of the arrangement. The pine wood loon decoy sat on the mantel at the lake house my whole childhood. My father carved it before I was born, or had it carved by a man in Donnelly. The story changed depending on who told it. It was not a real decoy, too light, the paint chipped on its beak, but it lived on the mantel between two framed photos, and when I was little, I was allowed to hold it if I was careful. When I moved to Boise, my mother said I could take it. I think she thought I wouldn't. I took it and put it on my bookshelf in our apartment, then in our little house on Lutta Street after we bought it in 2020. It sat next to my library science textbooks and a jar of smooth river rocks Daniel and I collected at Lucky Peak. I dusted it every Sunday. It was the one thing from the lake house that felt like it was actually mine. The money kept going out. Daniel and I talked about it in the way married people talk about something they have decided not to fight about. We had a budget meeting on Sundays at the kitchen table. He would say lake house again, and I would say lake house again, and we would move money around. We delayed replacing our mattress for 2 years. We didn't take a real vacation from 2018 to 2022. I picked up extra shifts covering the library's summer reading program for the stipend. Daniel started doing weekend installs for extra pay. My mother would call and say, "The assessment is due," and I would say, "I know. I have it scheduled." She never said thank you in a way that sounded like she meant it. She said, "Well, good, because your father worries." In 2021, I found the county invoice. I wasn't snooping. I was at the lake house for the 4th of July. The only time that year I went, and I was looking for a spare roll of paper towels in the utility closet where my mother kept files. There was a manila folder labeled Doc 2020-2021. Inside was a Valley County invoice and a receipt. The seawall work had been covered by a $500 grant from the county's Shoreline Preservation Fund. The dock repair had been done by a friend of Jason's, a kid named Tyler, for $400 cash. There was a handwritten note from Tyler. "Thanks, Jay." I sat on the floor of that closet with that paper in my hands and did the math that I had already done 100 times. I had sent $3,100 August before that for 9 years. I didn't confront her that weekend. I put the folder back exactly how I found it. I told Daniel in the car on the way home to Boise. He was driving, his hands tight on the wheel on Highway 55. He said, "Are you sure you read it right?" I said yes. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. I kept paying after that. I told myself maybe the grant was new. Maybe the $400 was just part of it. I didn't want to be the person who made a fight about $3,100 at a family lake house. I kept the copy I made on my phone in a hidden album and didn't look at it. My mother kept telling people I had abandoned the lake house. I heard it secondhand, then firsthand. My cousin Maya told me at Christmas 2022, that Evelyn had said I wanted nothing to do with the family legacy, that I was too busy with my career in Boise to come around. I was standing in my mother's kitchen at that moment, holding a tray of deviled eggs I had brought. My mother was in the living room telling Maya's mom the same story. Louder, she said, "Lauren made her choice. She has her library and her life in the city." She said it fondly, like she was sad for me. My father stood by the window and looked out at the lake. Jason was in the kitchen with me and said, "No offense, but you never come up anymore." I said, "I was here in July. I paid the assessment." He said, "What?" My mother called from the other room that food was getting cold. I started coming less. Not to punish anyone, it just hurt to be in a house I was paying for and be told I had abandoned it. In February 2024, I had the appendectomy. It was a Tuesday. I had felt sick since Sunday, thought it was food poisoning from the staff potluck at the library. By Monday night, I couldn't stand up straight. Daniel drove me to St. Luke's at 2 in the morning. They did a CT and said it was acute appendicitis, laparoscopic surgery that morning, one night in the hospital, a week at home before I could go back to work. Daniel was between jobs then. His telecom company had lost the contract in January, and he was doing interviews, but nothing had landed. We had insurance through the library, but the deductible was high and the surgeon was out of network for the assistant fee. The total we owed after insurance was $7,800. I remember the number because the billing office printed it on a blue sheet and handed it to me while I was still in the recovery chair with an IV in my arm. I texted my mother from the hospital. I sent a photo of my wristband. I said, "Surgery this morning, appendix home tomorrow. Will be off work a week." She texted back 4 hours later, "Oh, honey, hope you feel better soon. Praying for you." That was it. My father didn't call, Jason didn't text. Carol called that evening and talked to Daniel because I was asleep. She sent soup the next day through a delivery service, chicken and rice from a place in Boise she found online, with a note that said, "Rest, love, Carol." The next day, Wednesday, while I was on the couch with a pillow pressed against my incision and Daniel was in the kitchen trying to figure out how to pay the $7,800 on top of the mortgage supplement and the utilities that were both due that week, my mother called. I thought she was calling to check on me. She said, "Hi, Lauren. How are you feeling?" I said, "Sore tired." She said, "Good, good. You rest?" Then she said, "Listen, the insurance on the lake house auto-drafted and it overdrew me. Could you send the $425 early this month? And the mortgage supplement is due next week. Don't forget." I said, "Mom, I just had surgery." I said, "Daniel is out of work. We have a $7,800 bill." There was a pause. She said, "Well, we all have bills." Then she said it. "If you were really family, you wouldn't need to be asked." I didn't cry. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at Daniel. He was standing at the counter with the blue billing sheet in his hand. I said, "I have to go," and hung up. I didn't send the $425. I didn't send the $875. I canceled both automatic transfers that night from my laptop on the couch. It took 3 clicks each. I had been afraid to do it for 9 years, and it took 3 clicks. Daniel sat next to me and put his hand on my knee and said, "Are you sure?" I said yes. I said I was sure for the first time in a long time. The week I was supposed to be recovering, I did accounting instead. I opened the black binder and the spreadsheet and added everything up properly, not just the monthly outflow but the total. $9,400 of $500 for the mortgage supplement, $45,900 for insurance and utilities, $27,900 books for the doc and seawall assessments, $157,900 for the dock and seawall assessments, $16,800, $400 and I wrote it at the bottom of the spreadsheet in bold and stared at it. $168,330. That was a down payment on a second house. That was 2 years of my salary as a branch manager. That was the $7,800 surgical bill 10 times over and then some. I printed the summary page and put it in the front of the binder. I printed every Venmo receipt, every bank confirmation, every email where my mother said, "Can you cover this?" I put them in chronological order. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just knew I wanted it in one place where I could see it. My mother called twice that week about the missed payments. I let them go to voicemail. She left messages that were short and tight. "Lauren, the mortgage payment bounced. Lauren, call me back." My father called once and said, "Your mother is upset. You know how she is." I said, "I just had surgery, Dad." He said, "I know, honey, but the lake house." I said, "The lake house will be fine." He didn't call back. Jason texted me the next week, "Yo, did you stop paying?" "Mom said you stopped paying." I didn't answer. I went back to work after 10 days. The library was the same patrons, the same holds to shelve, the same kids' story time on Thursday mornings. I like the sameness. I came home and Daniel had made dinner and we ate at our small table and didn't talk about McCall. We talked about his interviews. He got a part-time offer from the Parks Department, doing maintenance. Less money but steady hours. We made a new budget without the $1,300. We put $500 toward the surgical bill. We put $200 into savings. For the first time in years, we had a little left at the end of the month. I kept expecting to feel guilty. I mostly felt tired, then a little lighter each week. In March, my mother sent a group text to the family, including me, about the lake house needing a new water heater. She said if everyone chips in $200, we can cover it. No one replied in the group. I didn't either. Carol texted me privately and said, "You okay?" I said yes. She said, "Good for you." In April, the invitation came. It was a paper invitation, cream-colored, with a photo of the lake house from the 1970s on the front. Hayes Family Lake House 50th Anniversary Reunion, July 2024. Community Open House Potluck, Remarks on Legacy. My mother had handwritten a note at the bottom of mine. "Hope you can come. Love, Mom." It was the first time she had written love without asking for something in the same sentence in a long time. Daniel asked if I wanted to go. I said I didn't know. I put the invitation on the fridge under a magnet shaped like an Idaho potato. Every morning I saw it while I made coffee. I thought about the loon on my bookshelf. I thought about the binder on my desk. I thought about the $16,830 and the sentence she said while I was holding a pillow against my stitches. In late May, a package arrived. It was a vintage cookie tin, the kind with the faded roses on the lid and the rust around the rim. The return address was Carol Whitaker in Nampa. Inside was a bundle of my handwritten notes from years of visits. The ones I used to leave on the kitchen counter at the lake house saying cleaned the gutters, left propane receipt on fridge, fixed screen door. Love, Lauren. I had forgotten I wrote them. There were printed Venmo receipts, the same ones I had, but also photos. Photos of me at 28 on a ladder cleaning the gutters. Of me at 32 carrying a case of water softener salt up the steps. Of me at 35 on my knees scrubbing the dock boards while Jason sat on the bench looking at his phone. Carol had taken them or saved them when my mother threw them away, I don't know. At the bottom was a folded piece of lined paper. Her handwriting, careful and small. It said, "I always knew who kept that place afloat. I sat at our kitchen table and cried for the first time since the surgery. Not hard, just tears running down while Daniel stood behind me with his hands on my shoulders." I called Carol that night. She is 62 and has a voice that sounds like she is always about to laugh, even when she isn't. She said, "I kept those because I knew someone would try to say it didn't happen." She said, "Your mother is not a bad person, Lauren, but she is scared." She said my mother told her if she ever lost that lake house she would be a failure, and she believed it. She said, "That doesn't make what she did right." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you going to the anniversary?" I said, "I think I have to." She said, "Bring the binder." I didn't decide to tell the truth at the anniversary until the week before. I told myself I was just going to go and be polite and eat potato salad and leave. But every night I opened the binder and looked at the total. $168,300. I looked at the county invoice copy I had printed and put in the back. $500 grant, $400 to Tyler. I looked at the blue billing sheet for $700 that was still on our fridge because we were paying it in installments. I practiced what I would say in the shower, in the car, while shelving books. I kept it short. I didn't want to scream. I wanted to say numbers out loud in a room where people had been told I didn't care. The day before we were supposed to drive to McCall, my mother called. She didn't mention money. She said, "I'm glad you're coming. It means a lot to your father." She said, "Will you say a few words about family legacy? You speak so well, you're the library manager." I said, "Sure." She said, "Wonderful. We'll save you a spot." After she hung up, Daniel said, "Are you okay to do this?" I said, "I think so." He said, "You don't have to." I said, "I know." We packed the car that Friday afternoon. Daniel put our overnight bag in the trunk. I put the black binder in my tote bag, zipped it closed. I put the cookie tin on top of it. I took the pine wood loon off the bookshelf, wrapped it in a dish towel, and put it in the tote too. It had sat on that shelf for 9 years while I paid for a house I was told I had abandoned. I wanted it to go home for one night, even if I didn't know what would happen after. We left Boise at 4. The highway to McCall was busy with weekend traffic, boats hitched to trucks, coolers in back seats. Daniel drove and I watched the river go by. I didn't talk much. I had the binder on my feet and the tin on my lap. My phone buzzed once. It was Carol. She said, "Driving up tomorrow morning, save me a seat." I said, "Will do." We got to town after 7 and stayed at a motel on the edge of McCall, not at the lake house. I couldn't stay there. We ate at a taco place and went to bed early. I lay awake and listened to the trucks on the highway and thought about the mantle and the dust outline where the loon used to sit. I thought about my mother's sentence. "If you were really family, you wouldn't need to be asked." I thought about flipping it around and what it would sound like out loud. In the morning, we drove to the lake house at 10. There were already cars parked on the grass, balloons tied to the mailbox, a banner that said 50 years. My father was on the porch shaking hands with neighbors. My mother was in a blue dress, moving from group to group, hugging people, telling the story of how she and my father bought the place in 1974 with a loan from her parents and built the dock themselves. Jason was by the side door, smoking, looking at his phone. He saw me get out of the car with the tote bag and his face changed. My mother saw me and came over fast, arms out. She said, "Lauren, you came. Welcome back." She said it like I had been gone a long time and had finally returned. She hugged me and I hugged her back because people were watching. She smelled like the same perfume she always wore. She said, "We are so happy you're here." Then she leaned in and whispered, "You will say something nice, won't you, about legacy and sacrifice and holding things together when others walk away." She looked right at me when she said that last part and smiled. Then she said, "Lauren, why don't you say a few words about what family means to you?" The room went quiet. Daniel's hand found the small of my back. I picked up my tote bag. I took out the black binder and the cookie tin and set them on the kitchen counter where everyone could see them. I took out the pine wood loon decoy and held it in my palm for a second longer than I needed to. It was lighter than I remembered. The pine wood had darkened over the years on my bookshelf in Boise, the beak a little chipped where Daniel had knocked it off the shelf vacuuming. I had dusted it every Sunday. For 9 years it sat next to my library nameplate while I paid for a house I was told I had abandoned. Jason was the first one to move. He had been leaning against the side door with his cigarette, watching me unpack that tote bag. When he saw the black binder and the vintage cookie tin hit the kitchen counter, his face went flat. He didn't come closer. He turned and pushed through the screen door and out onto the side deck where the coolers were stacked. I heard his phone unlock. I heard him say it low and fast, like he thought no one inside would hear him through the open window. "Mom, she has everything written down. My mother was still standing in front of me, smiling for the room. She didn't hear him. Or she pretended not to. She had her hand on my forearm, her nails painted the same pale pink she always wore to church. She said again, louder this time for everyone to hear, "Lauren is going to say a few words about what family means to her. About legacy." The living room was full. My father was by the stone fireplace. My Aunt Carol was in the back by the kitchen, holding her purse with both hands. There were neighbors from 2 cabins down, cousins I hadn't seen since before Daniel and I got married, a woman from the McCall Historical Society who had come to take a photo for the town paper. The banner said 50 years in gold letters. Someone had put out a sheet cake with the lake house painted in frosting. Daniel stepped up beside me and put his hand on the small of my back. He didn't say anything, he just stood there so I would know he was there. I opened the black binder. I had printed everything, every Venmo receipt, every bank transfer. Every note my mother had sent that said, "Can you cover this month? We'll pay you back," and then never mentioned it again. I had a spreadsheet that started in summer 2015, when I was 30, when my mother called me after the family barbecue and said the mortgage supplement was going to be late and could I help just this once. That once became 9 years. I didn't raise my voice. I had practiced this in the car for 2 hours on the drive up from Boise, and I had practiced it for 5 months in my kitchen after I stopped paying. I said, "I want to talk about what it costs to keep this house." My mother laughed a little like I had made a joke. She said, "Oh, honey, you don't need to." I kept going. I said, from summer 2015 until February 2024. I paid the bills for this house every month. I paid $875 every month for the mortgage supplement. That was 108 times. That was $94,500. I paid $425 in every month for insurance and utilities. That was also 108 times. That was $45,900, and I paid $3,100 every year for the annual dock and seawall assessment. That was 9 times. That was $27,900. The total I paid is $168,300. I said the number slowly. I said it exactly. I had added it 100 times on my laptop at the library after hours, and Carol had added it on her own calculator, and we got the same number. 168,330. No one moved. My father looked down at the floor. Jason was back in the doorway, his phone still in his hand, his face red. I said, "I found the county invoice last fall. The seawall work in 2021 was covered by a $500 grant from Valley County. The dock repairs that year were done by Jason's friend for $400. I was charged $3,100 that year and every year." My mother opened her mouth. I could see her trying to find the story she had told everyone else. She had told the neighbors and my cousins and the people at church that I had abandoned the lake house, that I wanted nothing to do with family, that I was too busy in Boise with my library job to care about legacy. She had said it so many times that people believed it. I had heard it secondhand from Carol, who had heard it at Thanksgiving. I said, in February 2024, I had an emergency laparoscopic appendectomy. I was in St. Luke's for 3 days. Daniel was between jobs. The hospital bill was $7,800. I called my mother from the recovery room because I thought she would want to know. She asked if I could still send the March payment on time because the insurance was due. My father didn't call. Jason didn't call. Carol was the only one who called. When I told my mother I couldn't keep paying, she said, "If you were really family, you wouldn't need to be asked." I looked at my mother when I said that sentence. I had memorized it word for word because it had stayed in my head for 5 months every time I tried to sleep. She flinched. It was small. Her hand dropped from my arm. I said I was family, and I still had to beg to be asked how I was. That was the flip. I didn't shout it. I said it the same way I had said the numbers. Calm and factual. I had learned from 9 years of keeping a ledger that numbers don't need to shout to be true. My mother didn't answer right away. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. Then she did what she always does when she is cornered. She made it smaller. She said very quietly, so only the people closest could hear. "You don't know what it was like to hold this place together. You don't know what my mother said to me if I let it go." It wasn't an apology, it was an explanation that asked me to feel sorry for her. Later, I would understand it better, but in that moment it just hung there. My father cleared his throat. He said, "Lauren, we didn't know it was that much." He said it like that made it different. He looked at my mother, then at me, then at the binder. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he would fix it. He just said he didn't know. He had let my mother manage the narrative for so long that not knowing had become his job. Jason stepped forward then. He said, "You didn't have to keep paying if you didn't want to. No one forced you." His voice was defensive and loud. He said, "You think you're better than us because you kept receipts? You think that makes you family?" He was still holding his phone. He looked at the cookie tin like it was a trick. Carol moved from the back of the room. She is 62 and she doesn't move fast, but she came straight to the counter and put her hand on the tin. She said, "I kept these because I watched her work." She opened the tin and took out the bundle inside. There were handwritten notes from my mother on lined paper, printed Venmo receipts where the memo line said, "Lake House, thanks sweetie," and 3 photos Carol had taken without telling me. One was me at 28, staining the deck in the sun. One was me carrying groceries up from the car while my mother sat on the porch. One was me on my laptop at the kitchen table at midnight, paying the bill while everyone else was asleep. Carol had kept them in that vintage cookie tin with the faded roses on the lid for years because, as she wrote in the note she mailed me in March, I always knew who kept that place afloat. She handed the photos to the woman from the Historical Society without asking. The woman looked at them and then at my mother. My mother looked at the pine wood loon in my hand. She said, "Where did you get that?" I said, "It was on my bookshelf in Boise. You gave it to me when I was 12. It sat on this mantel before that." I walked to the stone fireplace and placed it back where it had been when I was a child. I set it down carefully, facing the lake through the window. I left it there. It belonged to the house, not to me. That was the point. I had carried it with me as a reminder of summers that felt good, and now I was putting it back as closure. I wasn't taking it home again. My mother watched me do it, and her eyes filled. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she was sorry. She said, "You didn't have to do it like this, in front of everyone." I said I tried to do it privately for 9 years. No one listened. Daniel zipped the tote bag closed. He didn't touch the binder or the tin. I left them on the counter. I said, "The binder stays here. Anyone who wants to see it can see it. The total is $168,330. I'm not paying going forward. If you want to keep the house, you will need to figure out how." No one clapped, no one hugged. The woman from the Historical Society put her camera down. A cousin I hadn't seen in 10 years came up and touched my elbow and said, "I didn't know." My father stood by the fireplace with his hands in his pockets and wouldn't meet my eyes. Jason went back outside and slammed the screen door. We didn't stay for cake. Daniel and I walked out to the car while people were still standing in that quiet. Carol followed us to the parking area on the grass. She hugged me hard and said, "You did right? You said it plain?" She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was a copy of the county grant letter for the seawall. She had gotten it from the clerk's office herself. On the drive back to Boise, Daniel drove and I held that paper and watched the trees go by. We didn't talk much. At one point I said, "I thought I would feel worse." He said, "You said what was true. That's enough." The aftermath was not dramatic. That is what people don't understand about family truth-telling. You think there will be a big fight or a big reunion, but mostly there's just quiet and then mail. 2 weeks after the anniversary, a letter came to our house on Warm Springs Avenue. It was from my mother. 2 pages, handwritten on her good stationery, the kind she uses for thank you notes. She wrote about her own mother, my grandmother, who I barely remembered. She wrote that her mother told her in 1974 that if she ever lost the lake house, it would mean she had failed as a mother, that property was the only thing that kept a family together, that people would talk. She wrote that when my father was laid off in 2014 and the mortgage supplement got behind, she was terrified of being the one who lost it. She wrote that she told people I had abandoned the house because it was easier than saying she couldn't afford it. And because if people thought I didn't care, they wouldn't ask why I wasn't there. She wrote about pressure and legacy and sacrifice. She never wrote the words "I am sorry" or "I was wrong." She ended the letter with, "I hope you understand now why I did what I did and love, Mom." I read it twice at the kitchen table while Daniel made coffee. I folded it and put it in the binder, which Carol had mailed back to me after the reunion because no one at the house wanted to keep it. I didn't write back right away. Jason stayed distant and defensive. He texted me once in August, a single line, "You embarrassed Mom, that was your choice." I didn't reply. He is still living rent-free at the lake house as far as I know. My father told Carol that Jason is paying the utilities now, or at least some of them, and that the dock assessment this year was only $400 because they couldn't charge me anymore. My father didn't tell me directly. My father did call, eventually. It was late September, on a Tuesday night after I had closed the library. He called my cell and asked if I was busy. I said no. He said, "Your mother showed me the binder. I added it up myself." I didn't realize. He paused for a long time. He said, "I should have asked. I should have checked on you in February." He didn't make excuses for my mother. He didn't ask me to forgive her. He asked if Daniel's job situation had gotten better and if my scar was still hurting. It was a small, awkward call. It was the first honest one we had had in years. We have talked 3 times since then, short calls, always about practical things. He asks about the library. I ask about his blood pressure. We are building something low contact and careful. It is not close, but it is not nothing. Carol and I talk every Sunday now. She calls at 4 o'clock when she is making dinner. She tells me about her garden, and I tell her about the library's summer reading program. She never asks me for money. She never tells me what to do about my mother. In October, she drove down to Boise and brought me a new plant for my desk, and we went to lunch. She said, "You don't have to decide anything forever. You just have to decide what you will and won't pay for." I took her advice literally. I set boundaries on money that I had never set before. I closed the automatic transfer I had set up in 2015. I told my mother in a short email that I would not be contributing to the lake house going forward, that if there was a true emergency she could ask, but I would decide case by case. I did not offer to pay the $875 or the $424. The first month I felt guilty every day. The second month I felt guilty every other day. By the 4th month I just felt clear. Daniel found a new job in August, managing inventory for a hardware distributor. It pays less than his old job, but the hours are steady, and he is home for dinner. We are paying off the $7 and $800 a month. We eat at home more. We walk the Greenbelt on Sundays. My life in Boise is small and honest and specific in a way I like. I shelve books. I help kids find the right reading level. I make soup on Thursdays. I water the plant Carol gave me. I don't check my phone hoping my mother has called to ask how I am. I finally understood that being counted on and being cherished were never the same thing. The pine wood loon is still on the mantel in McCall. Carol sent me a photo at Christmas. The tree was up and the loon was there, facing the window. My mother had dusted it. She didn't throw it away. I don't know what that means, and I don't need to decide yet. I left it there as a marker that I had told the truth in that room and that I didn't need to carry the proof home anymore. The binder is in my closet in Boise, on the top shelf. I don't open it much. I know what it says, a 168,330 set. That number is not a weapon anymore. It is just a fact, like a call number on a spine. Some relationships are still unresolved and will stay that way for a while. My mother has not apologized directly, and I don't expect her to now. Jason is still defensive and distant. My father is trying in his quiet, passive way. Carol is the one who stepped up, and I let her. That is the honest aftermath, not a warm everyone hugs ending, but a truer one where one person shows up and the others stay where they are, and I get to choose what I carry. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been the one quietly paying, keeping the ledger, and being called the one who walked away, please share your experience in the comments. Hit like and subscribe for more real family stories. Your voice helps someone else feel less alone.